Russia is plunged into darkness, even thousands of miles away. This is Sakhalin Island on the Japanese border, 6,800 kilometers from the Ukrainian front. What you see on this Russian island is not a natural catastrophe. This is the moment life stopped for more than 100,000 Russian civilians and soldiers. On the night of October 27, 2025, mysterious explosions at a critical thermal power plant on Sakhalin Island turned the island into hell. A total of 8 cities, including the capital Yuzhno-Sakhalinsk from Korsov to Uglogorsk, were left without electricity. For more than 100,000 people, life came to a standstill for a while. This island is not just a piece of land for Russia. It is a key military stronghold positioned against the presence of Japan and the U.S. in the Pacific, hosting important bases for the Pacific Fleet, long-range radar systems, air defense batteries, and strategic airfields. While Vladimir Putin poses for friendship photos with Xi Jinping in Beijing and Kim Jong-un in Pyongyang against the backdrop of the West, he is now watching the Pacific's easternmost stronghold sink into darkness and lose its power. Until now, such mysterious explosions or attacks have occurred in Moscow's suburbs or cities near the Ukrainian border. However, the island's location and the resulting chaos take this to a different level. The chaos caused by the explosion at the thermal power plant on Sakhalin Island directly threatens not only civilian life, but also the island's critical military and strategic importance to Russia. This incident has revealed how fragile one of Russia's most important forward bases in the Pacific can be, and how a collapse in energy infrastructure can paralyze military operations. Sakhalin is not just a simple island. It is a key element of Russia's power, projection, and defense architecture in East Asia. The island's strategic location just a few kilometers from Japan's Hokkaido Island and controlling the passages between the Sea of Okhotsk and the Pacific Ocean has made it a constant focus of attention for both Japan and the U.S. military presence in the region. Aware of this strategic importance, Russia has heavily militarized the island. The island hosts air bases housing modern fighter jets such as the Su-35, naval bases used by ships and submarines belonging to the Pacific Fleet, long-range radar systems critical for monitoring Japanese and U.S. movements, and advanced air defense elements like the S-400 to counter potential attacks. Sakhalin is designed as Russia's unsinkable aircraft carrier in the Pacific and its first line of defense against Japan and the U.S. This is a significant part of the military power behind Vladimir Putin's Eastern Alliance posturing with Xi Jinping and Kim Jong-un. The explosion at the Yuzhno-Sakhalinsk thermal power plant and the subsequent widespread power outage demonstrated how fragile the foundations of this strategic stronghold are. Modern military operations are absolutely dependent on an uninterrupted and reliable energy supply. The operation of radars, the functioning of command and control centers, the maintenance of communication systems, the tracking and engagement of targets by air defense batteries, the lighting of runways at air bases, the use of port systems by ships. All of these require a stable source of electricity. The shutdown of the thermal power plant has directly threatened all these military systems on the island. Although military bases have their own emergency generators, it is uncertain how long these generators can operate, at what capacity, and how long they can power all systems, especially high-energy consuming radars and command centers. In the event of a prolonged outage, the operational efficiency of the Russian military presence on the island could be seriously compromised. Communication breakdowns could occur, and most importantly, the region's air and sea defense capabilities could be weakened. This situation represents an unacceptable military vulnerability for Russia, especially with NATO ally Japan and the U.S. Pacific forces in the region right next door. A military base without electricity becomes an easy target for potential adversaries. It is blind, deaf, and largely defenseless. The explosion on Sakhalin is not just an infrastructure problem, but also a strategic fiasco that shakes the foundations of Russia's military power in the Pacific. The real reason behind all this chaos remains unknown. Thermal power plants do not simply explode on their own. Following the devastating explosions at the Yuzhno-Sakhalinsk thermal power plant on Sakhalin Island, the Kremlin's initial reflex was to try to brush off the incident as a simple technical malfunction or accident. However, given both the timing of the incident and the critical nature of the target, this explanation raises many questions and strongly suggests the possibility of deliberate intervention, i.e. sabotage either from within or without. Thermal power plants are vital energy sources for a city or region. Like nuclear power plants or large dams, such facilities are normally equipped with multi-layered security protocols and backup systems to protect against malfunctions, accidents, and even external interference. Especially on an island like Sakhalin, which is extremely sensitive from a strategic point of view, Located on the border with Japan and hosting a heavy military presence, protecting such a critical infrastructure facility would be expected to be a top priority. The fact that a facility presumed to be so heavily guarded could explode so destructively on its own suggests either a series of unimaginable negligence and incompetence or a much more organized and deliberate act. The technical failure explanation is not very convincing in this context. Moreover, the timing of this explosion also raises suspicions. The incident occurred at a time when Russia's energy infrastructure was already suffering heavy damage from Ukraine's months-long and increasingly intense drone attacks. In recent weeks, transformer stations, power plants, and oil refineries in Bryansk, Belgorod, Smolensk, Volgograd, and even near Moscow had been targeted repeatedly, leaving hundreds of thousands of Russian citizens without electricity. Ukraine had clearly adopted a strategy of bringing the war to Russia's doorstep and targeting Russian infrastructure. In this very atmosphere, the explosion of a critical energy facility in Sakhalin, thousands of kilometers away from the Ukrainian front, creates a situation that is difficult to explain as a coincidence. This timing strengthens the possibility that the incident could be part of a broader strategy. When these high security factors and suspicious timing are considered together, the possibility of the Sakhalin explosion being a simple accident appears quite weak. This situation inevitably leads us to take the possibility of sabotage more seriously. So who could have carried out this sabotage and how? If the explosion at the Sakhalin thermal power plant was not an accident, and if Ukraine's known long-range weapons, drones, missiles are unlikely to reach a distance of 6,800 kilometers with current technology, then one of the strongest possibilities remains: internal intervention. This is one of the Kremlin's worst nightmares, that the pressure and discontent created by the war will lead to sabotage actions within Russia, even in the most remote and supposedly secure regions. Since the beginning of the war, there have been strong allegations and some evidence that Ukrainian intelligence services GUR or SBU have supported or directed partisan groups operating within the Russian Federation, consisting of Russian citizens or at least receiving support from within Russia. Groups such as the Russian Freedom Legion or Siberian Battalion have carried out cross-border infiltration operations, particularly targeting border regions such as Belgorod and Bryansk. However, sabotage actions have also been carried out against targets deeper within Russia. Responsibility for incidents such as the blowing up of railway lines, the arson of military registration and enlistment offices, and attacks on fuel depots has sometimes been claimed by or attributed to such groups. This situation indicates the existence of active resistance potential against the regime within Russia. The main factor fueling this potential resistance is the growing discontent within Russian society as the war drags on. Economic hardship, inflation, unemployment, the impact of sanctions, heavy military losses, hundreds of thousands of dead or wounded, fear of mobilization, and the regime's increasingly repressive policies. Censorship, arrests may have led to a serious accumulation of weariness and anger among different segments of society. Although this discontent is often expressed silently and passively, it may push some individuals or small radicalized groups towards more active and violent actions. In this context, in a geographically remote region like Sakhalin, thousands of kilometers away from Moscow, and perhaps under weaker central control or FSB surveillance, the scenario of an internal group or dissatisfied individuals targeting a critical thermal power plant does not seem unreasonable at all. Such an action could aim to strike a symbolic blow against the regime, while also fueling discontent by exacerbating the hardships experienced by the local population. Those carrying out the action could be employees with access to the facility, former soldiers, or local cells linked to Ukrainian intelligence. The method used could range from a simple explosive to a cyber attack targeting the facility's control systems. If the Sakhalin explosion was indeed an act of sabotage carried out from within, this would be far more dangerous for the Kremlin than a missile attack from Ukraine. It would show that the war is beginning to shake the foundations of the regime, not only from outside, but also from within. That discontent is dangerously turning into action, and that the Russian security apparatus is struggling to control even its own citizens. This could mean the realization of Putin's greatest fear, that the war will turn into a cancer that corrodes Russia from within. The economic and civil consequences of the incident also support this possibility. This means a serious crisis on an isolated island like Sakhalin, because the partisans and Ukrainians want to make their experiences felt even in the most remote Russian territories. Another striking aspect here is the psychological shock experienced by the people of Sakhalin. These people had been watching the war in Ukraine from afar. For them, the conflict was a reality that existed only in the news. But this explosion made them feel that the distant war was no longer distant. Overnight, a sense of security gave way to silent anxiety. With temperatures dropping below freezing at night, power outages are no longer just a technical problem, but a matter of life and death. This is because thermal power plants in Sakhalin not only generate electricity, but also supply hot water to the central heating systems of cities. If power outages persist, there is a risk that the heating infrastructure will be disabled, which could create significant hardship for the public in cold weather. In addition, energy outages have the potential to cause disruptions in essential services such as communications, water, and transportation. Mobile communications weakened in some areas and internet access became limited. With the water pumps stopped, some neighborhoods reportedly experienced temporary difficulties accessing clean water. Hospitals tried to maintain a critical balance with generator support. The economic impact of this situation cannot be ignored. The economy of Sakhalin Island relies heavily on natural gas, fishing, and port activities. It is estimated that prolonged power outages could cause temporary slowdowns or production disruptions in these sectors. Risks such as delays in salary payments and disruptions in supply chains are increasing the economic concerns of the population. This is becoming a factor that fuels social tension. The events in Sakhalin dramatically revealed how vulnerable this vast and fragile structure is. At this point, the main question that needs to be asked is, where will the next target be? A petroleum pipeline in Siberia or a military production complex in the Urals? Uncertainty is one of the biggest nightmares for this regime, as it makes both taking precautions and reassuring the public nearly impossible. If this explosion was an act of sabotage, then the situation is even more dire. The fact that such an act carried out from within or without could succeed clearly exposes the FSB's weakness in ensuring internal security and the Russian army's inadequacy in the face of external threats. The Russian security apparatus at all levels appears to be paralyzed. The Kremlin's myth of a state that sees everything, prevents everything, and punishes everything, which it has been trying to build for years, has begun to crumble with a single explosion. However, the most destructive impact of this incident is psychological, not physical. The attack or sabotage in Sakhalin deepens the perception in the minds of the people and the elite that nowhere is safe anymore. This feeling not only creates fear, it also triggers a systematic distrust and growing anger towards the regime. The illusion of stability and control, one of the Kremlin's greatest pillars, thus begins to unravel. People now believe they are in danger not only at the front but also in their homes, factories, and even on remote islands. This creates serious cracks in the loyalty of both the public and the elite class to the regime. All these developments inevitably push Putin's administration into a resource dilemma. The Kremlin, already depleted of resources due to the grueling war in Ukraine, heavy Western sanctions, and a growing economic crisis at home, may now also have to protect infrastructure in the most remote corners of the country. How does this problem of scattered resources create a strategic stalemate? Putin may be forced to redeploy the FSB, Rosvia, and even army units to protect critical facilities in low-priority regions like Sakhalin. This means drawing resources from the front lines, which are already suffering from a shortage of soldiers, or from high-priority regions like Moscow. The regime is being crushed under the weight of its own empire. They cannot protect everywhere at once. Protecting thousands of critical facilities spread across thousands of square kilometers 24/7 is astronomically expensive. This places an additional burden on Russia's already collapsing budget. Funds will have to be cut either from the war effort or from social spending. The more resources are spread thin, the lower the security level at each point becomes. A few FSB agents or Rosvardia units may not be enough to prevent a well-planned sabotage operation. Another important consequence of the Sakhalin explosion in the bigger picture is its regional repercussions. Sakhalin Island is a region of strategic importance not only for Russia, but also for its neighbor Japan. How could this explosion affect the regional balance of power? Japan will watch this mysterious explosion on the large Russian island next door and the ensuing chaos with great concern. Issues such as how the power outage will affect Russian military activities in the region and whether there is a power vacuum on the island are of vital importance to Tokyo. This incident may prompt Japan to increase its own defense preparedness and monitor Russian activities in the region more closely. Russia also seeks to project itself as powerful and in control in the Far East. This incident in Sakhalin, by demonstrating that Russia cannot even protect critical infrastructure on its own territory, will severely damage Moscow's image as a regional power. This could influence the perspective of regional actors such as Japan, South Korea, and even China toward Russia. If it is proven that an external force was behind this explosion, could this lead to an unexpected escalation of tension in the region? Although this is a low probability, the potential for a domino effect should not be overlooked. The Sakhalin explosion is significant in that it shows the effects of the war are no longer limited to Europe, but extend to the Pacific and shake Russia's global position. In conclusion, the thermal power plant explosion in Sakhalin was probably not an accident. This could be a frightening sign that the fire of war and internal decay have reached even the furthest reaches of the Russian Empire. Whether it was internal sabotage or a horrific reflection of Ukraine's asymmetric power, the result is the same. Vladimir Putin is losing control of the war he started, and Russia from the center to the remotest corners is being dragged into darkness and chaos region by region. The Kremlin's propaganda of stability and security may have faded away along with the electricity cut in Sakhalin. The empire is cracking. Thank you for choosing us.